The church bells had barely stopped ringing when Elena Voss felt the first crack in her heart. She stood at the altar in a white gown that had taken 3 months to sew, her hands trembling as she waited for Damien to step forward and say the words that would bind them forever. Every eye in the grand hall of the Ashwood pack was fixed on her, waiting, watching, holding its breath along with her. Damien did not move. He stood at the far end of the aisle, dressed in his ceremonial black coat, his jaw tight, his eyes darting toward the crowd instead of toward her. Something was wrong. Elena could feel it in the pit of her stomach, a cold weight settling where warmth should have been. She had known Damien since she was 16 years old. She had watched him grow into the man everyone expected to lead the pack one day. She had loved him with a quiet, patient love that had waited years for this single moment. And now he would not even look at her. The pack elder, an old and respected wolf named Garrett, cleared his throat and gestured for Damien to step forward and complete the binding words. The silence stretched. Somewhere in the crowd, a child coughed. Somewhere else, a chair creaked as someone shifted uncomfortably. Elena kept her chin high, refusing to let the trembling in her chest show on her face. Though her heart was hammering so loudly, she was certain the front row could hear it. Then Damien spoke, and his words shattered everything. "I cannot do this," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed hall. "I cannot bind myself to Elena." Gasps rippled through the crowd, like wind through tall grass. Elena felt her knees weaken, but she locked them in place, refusing to fall. She had heard him wrong. She must have heard him wrong. But when she looked at his face, she saw no confusion there, no uncertainty. Only a strange, guilty relief, as though he had been carrying these words inside him for a long time, and was glad to finally let them out. "I have found someone else," Damien continued, and this time his eyes flicked toward the side of the hall, toward a young woman standing near the front. Lauren Blake, the daughter of the Pax Beta, stood with her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her face pale, but her eyes fixed on Damien, with an expression that told Elena everything she needed to know. This was not new. This was not a decision made in the last few minutes. This had been happening for a while, hidden behind smiles and polite conversation. Behind every moment Elena had trusted him completely. "Elena is my fated mate," Damien said, and the way he said her name made it sound like an accusation rather than an endearment. "But fate does not always know best. My heart belongs to Lauren. It has for a long time. I am sorry, Elena. I truly am. But I will not spend my life bound to someone I do not love, no matter what the bond demands of me." The hall erupted into whispers, some sympathetic, most simply hungry for the spectacle unfolding before them. Elena stood frozen at the altar, her bouquet of white lilies shaking in her grip. She searched Damien's face for some sign that this was a cruel joke, some flicker of doubt that would tell her he would take the words back. But there was nothing. Only the quiet, terrible certainty of a man who had already made his choice, and simply needed an audience to witness it. She did not cry. She would not give the room that satisfaction. Instead, she set down her bouquet on the altar, with a steadiness that surprised even her, smoothed the front of her wedding gown, and turned to face the crowd. Hundreds of faces stared back at her, some with pity, some with poorly hidden amusement, a few with genuine sorrow. She searched for her mother among them, and found her near the back, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears already falling. Elena lifted her chin higher. "Then I wish you both happiness," she said, her voice carrying clearly, despite the tremor beneath it. She would not scream. She would not beg him to reconsider. She had too much pride left, even in this moment of complete devastation, to let him see how deeply the words had cut. She turned and walked down the aisle, past rows of guests who had come to celebrate her joy, and now watched her humiliation instead. Each step felt like walking through water, heavy and slow, though she knew she was moving as quickly as her legs would carry her. The heavy wooden doors of the hall loomed ahead, and beyond them, she could see the gray afternoon light of the courtyard, a promise of air she desperately needed. What Elena did not know, what she could not have known, was that near the very back of the hall, partially hidden behind a stone pillar, stood a man who had watched the entire scene unfold, with sharp, calculating eyes. He had arrived only an hour earlier, wrapped in a plain traveling cloak that hid his identity from the pack members who would have otherwise recognized him instantly and thrown the entire ceremony into chaos. He had come to observe the Ashwood pack quietly, to judge for himself whether their leadership was as strong and loyal as their reports claimed, ahead of an alliance meeting planned for the following season. He had not expected to witness a public humiliation. He had not expected to feel something twist sharply in his chest as he watched a young woman absorb a devastating blow in front of hundreds of strangers, and somehow remain standing, her spine straight, her voice steady, even as her whole world crumbled around her. His name was Cade Ashbourne, and he was the Alpha King, ruler over every pack in the Northern Territories, a man whose word could end wars or begin them with a single sentence. He had faced down rival alphas in combat, had negotiated treaties that saved thousands of lives, had built his reputation on being unshakable, unreadable, untouched by sentiment. Yet as he watched Elena Voss walk down that aisle, with her head held high, despite the tears she refused to shed, something inside him shifted, in a way he did not understand, and did not particularly welcome. He told himself it was simple curiosity. He told himself that any leader would take note of unusual strength in a moment of crisis, that his interest in her was purely a matter of assessing character, nothing more. But when she passed within a few feet of the pillar where he stood, and for just a fraction of a second her gaze swept across the crowd and grazed over him without truly seeing him, he felt a pull in his chest that had nothing to do with curiosity at all. It was faint. It was strange. It was something he had never felt before in all his years. Not even with the women his advisors had paraded before him as potential brides. Not even with the handful of connections that had sparked something resembling interest over the decades. This was different. This felt like recognition, though he had never laid eyes on this woman before in his life. He pushed the feeling aside, as she disappeared through the doors and into the courtyard beyond. It was not his place to interfere in the private affairs of the Ashwood pack, no matter how unjust the scene had seemed. He was here to observe, not to involve himself in local matters, especially not matters of the heart. He reminded himself of this firmly, as the hall behind him buzzed with gossip and speculation, as Damien stepped toward Lauren Blake, and the pack elder awkwardly tried to restore some sense of order to the gathering. But even as he told himself these things, his feet were already carrying him toward the doors Elena had just walked through. Outside, the courtyard was quiet, the gray sky threatening rain that had not yet fallen. Elena had made it only a short distance before her legs finally gave out on her resolve. She sank onto a low stone bench beneath a bare oak tree, her wedding gown pooling around her like spilled milk, and finally allowed herself to break. The sobs came in silent, violent waves, her shoulders shaking as she pressed both hands over her mouth to keep the sound from carrying back into the hall. She did not hear the footsteps approaching. She did not notice the tall figure standing several feet away, watching her with an expression caught somewhere between sympathy and fascination. Cade remained silent for a long moment, unwilling to intrude further on a grief that was clearly not meant for an audience, yet unable to simply walk away and leave her alone in her suffering. Finally, she seemed to sense his presence. She looked up sharply, swiping at her tear-streaked face with the back of her hand, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of the stranger standing nearby. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a plain gray cloak that did nothing to disguise the quiet authority radiating from him. His dark hair was slightly wind-tossed, his eyes an unusual shade of amber that seemed to catch even the dim afternoon light. "I am sorry," Elena said quickly, embarrassed to be seen in such a state. "This is not exactly how I planned to greet a wedding guest." "You have nothing to apologize for," Cade said, his voice low and steady, carrying none of the pity she had heard from everyone else that day. "What happened in there was cruel. You deserved far better than what he gave you." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. He did not speak like the sympathetic well-wishers who had already begun whispering about her inside the hall, their sorrow tinged with a hunger for gossip they would carry home to share over dinner. His words felt genuine, weighted with something that felt almost like anger on her behalf, though he was a complete stranger to her. "You are very kind to say so," Elena replied, straightening on the bench and trying to compose herself. "But I do not believe we have met. Are you a guest of the pack?" Cade hesitated for the briefest moment. Revealing his identity now, in this raw and unguarded moment, felt like it would change everything, would turn her grief into performance, her honesty into careful diplomacy. He was not ready to lose the strange, simple connection that had formed in these few minutes. Not yet. "I am merely passing through," he said instead, which was not entirely a lie. "I saw what happened, and I could not simply walk away without saying something. Elena studied him for a moment longer, something in his steady gaze putting her strangely at ease, despite the chaos of the day. Well, whoever you are, thank you for your kindness. Most people in that hall are far more interested in the scandal than in how I am actually feeling. Then most people in that hall are fools, Cade said simply, and for the first time since the ceremony had fallen apart, Elena felt the faintest ghost of a smile tug at the corner of her mouth. Neither of them could have known, in that quiet gray courtyard beneath the bare oak tree, that this brief and unplanned meeting would become the first thread in a story far larger than either of them yet understood. Elena believed she was speaking to a passing traveler, a kind stranger who happened to witness her worst moment. She had no idea that the man standing before her held more power in his hands than anyone she had ever met, and that the strange, quiet pull she felt toward him, even through her grief, was the beginning of something neither fate nor pride could easily undo. As the first drops of rain began to fall from the heavy gray sky, Elena rose from the bench, gathering the ruined hem of her wedding gown. I should go, she said softly. I need to be far away from this place before the sun sets. Where will you go? Cade asked, an urgency in his voice that surprised even him. Elena paused, considering the question for the first time. She had no plan, no destination, only the desperate need to put distance between herself and the wreckage of her old life. I do not know yet, she admitted, but I will find somewhere. I always do. She walked away from him then, disappearing around the side of the great hall toward the small cottage she had shared with her mother, leaving Cade standing alone in the rain, with a decision already forming in his mind, one that would set in motion events neither of them could yet predict. He watched her go until she vanished from sight, and then, quietly, he turned back toward the hall to gather his men, already resolving that whatever road Elena Voss chose to walk next, she would not walk it entirely alone. By the time Elena reached her mother's small cottage at the edge of the Ashwood territory, the rain had soaked through her wedding gown completely, turning the once pristine white fabric a heavy, clinging gray. She did not care. The cold felt almost welcome, a physical sensation sharp enough to distract her from the ache spreading through her chest with every breath she took. Her mother, Marguerite, was already waiting at the door, having slipped out of the hall moments after the disaster unfolded. She wrapped Elena in a woolen blanket the instant she stepped inside, guiding her toward the small fire crackling in the hearth, without a single word of judgment or pity, only quiet, steady comfort. You do not have to talk about it tonight, Marguerite said softly, smoothing back a strand of wet hair from her daughter's face. But know that I am here, and I am furious on your behalf, and Damien Cole is a coward who does not deserve one more second of your thoughts. Elena managed a small, broken laugh, despite the tears still threatening at the corners of her eyes. I appreciate the sentiment, Mother, even if it does not fix anything. They sat together by the fire for a long while, the storm outside growing heavier, rain hammering against the small windows of the cottage. Elena found herself replaying the ceremony over and over in her mind, searching for some sign she had missed, some clue that would have warned her this was coming. She found nothing. Damien had hidden his betrayal well, and she hated him a little more for the sheer effort he must have put into deceiving her so completely. But strangely, threaded through the pain and humiliation, her thoughts kept drifting back to the stranger in the courtyard. She could not explain why his image lingered so persistently in her mind, why the memory of his low, steady voice offering comfort felt more real to her than anything Damien had ever said. She told herself it meant nothing. He was simply a kind traveler who happened to witness her worst moment, nothing more. Yet she found herself wondering if their paths would ever cross again, and the wondering felt oddly comforting. The following morning brought harsh reality crashing back in. Word of the failed wedding had already spread through the entire pack territory, carried on the eager tongues of gossiping neighbors and curious onlookers. Elena could feel the weight of stares the moment she stepped outside to fetch water from the well, whispers following her like a shadow she could not shake. Some looked at her with pity. Others, she suspected, were quietly pleased to see the golden girl of Ashwood brought low. She endured it as best she could, keeping her chin high just as she had at the altar, refusing to let anyone see how deeply the humiliation still cut. But by midday, when Damien's mother arrived at their cottage uninvited, suggesting in poorly veiled terms that Elena ought to formally release Damien from any lingering obligations tied to their broken mate bond so that he could properly bind himself to Lauren Blake, something inside Elena finally hardened into cold, unshakable resolve. "Tell your son," Elena said evenly, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, "that he released himself from every obligation the moment he chose to humiliate me in front of the entire pack, instead of having the decency to speak with me privately beforehand. I will sign whatever papers are necessary, but I will not stand here and be lectured about grace by the woman who raised him to be a coward." Damien's mother left in a huff, and Marguerite, who had been listening from the kitchen, let out a short bark of laughter. "Well said, my girl, well said indeed." But despite the small victory, Elena knew she could not remain in Ashwood territory much longer. Every street corner, every familiar face, every building, held some memory tangled up with Damien and the life she had once imagined building here. The pack elders, though sympathetic in public, made it clear in private conversations that her presence complicated the delicate peace now needed between her family and the Beta's family, especially with the wedding between Damien and Lauren likely to be rescheduled within the coming months. She decided, 2 days after the failed ceremony, that she would leave Ashwood entirely. "Where will you go?" Marguerite asked that evening, worry etched deeply into the lines of her face as she watched Elena pack a small bag of essential belongings. "I am not certain yet," Elena admitted. "Perhaps to my aunt's territory in the eastern hills, perhaps further, to one of the free towns where pack politics matter less. I only know that I cannot stay here and watch Damien build his happiness in the same streets where he destroyed mine." Marguerite did not argue. She understood her daughter's need to escape, even as the thought of Elena traveling alone through unfamiliar and sometimes dangerous territory filled her with dread. The roads beyond Ashwood were not always safe, particularly for a lone woman without pack protection, and rumors of rogue wolves preying on unprotected travelers had grown more frequent in recent months. What neither Elena nor her mother knew was that their conversation, though private, had not gone entirely unnoticed. Cade had remained in the region longer than his original plans intended, quietly gathering information through his most trusted men while keeping his own identity carefully concealed from the pack at large. He had learned, through careful and discreet inquiry, that Elena intended to leave Ashwood within days, traveling without any formal escort into territory known for its unpredictable dangers. He told himself, once again, that this was not his concern. He had duties waiting for him back at his own court, an alliance to finalize, a kingdom to govern. He had no business involving himself in the personal affairs of a pack member from a territory he was meant to be quietly observing, not participating in. Yet the memory of Elena's tear-streaked face in the courtyard, the strange pull he had felt standing near her, refused to loosen its grip on his thoughts. Late that night, unable to sleep, Cade sat alone in the modest room he had rented at a small inn on the edge of Ashwood territory, staring into the low flames of a dying fire. His closest advisor and longtime friend, a sharp-witted man named Callum, found him there, still fully dressed despite the late hour. "You are still thinking about her," Callum said, not bothering to phrase it as a question. Cade did not deny it. "There is something strange happening, Callum. I felt something when I saw her, something I cannot explain. It is not simple attraction. It is deeper than that, and it unsettles me." Callum studied his friend carefully, recognizing the rare uncertainty in the Alpha King's expression, an uncertainty Cade almost never allowed himself to show, even in private. "You believe she might be your mate," Callum said slowly. "Even after everything you have told me over the years, about never expecting to find one, about believing the old stories were simply that, stories." "I do not know what I believe," Cade admitted, "but I intend to find out. She plans to leave this territory within days, traveling alone. I will not allow her to walk unprotected roads while I sit here debating my own uncertainty." "And what will you tell her, when you inevitably find some reason to follow?" Callum asked, a knowing edge creeping into his voice. "That the Alpha King of all northern territories has decided to personally escort a heartbroken woman he met once in a rainstorm?" Cade's jaw tightened. "Not yet. Not the truth. Not fully. If she learns who I am too soon, everything becomes complicated by politics and expectation. I want her to know me first, simply as a man, before the weight of a crown enters the equation. Callum shook his head slowly, though a faint smile tugged at his mouth. This is a dangerous game you are proposing, my friend. Deception, even well-intentioned deception, rarely ends without consequence. I know, Cade said quietly, but I am willing to accept that risk. 2 days later, exactly as she had promised her mother, Elena set out from Ashwood territory at dawn, a modest pack slung over her shoulder, her heart heavy, but her resolve unshaken. Marguerite embraced her tightly at the edge of the village, tears streaming freely down her face, despite her best efforts to remain strong for her daughter's sake. Write to me when you arrive somewhere safe, Marguerite said, gripping Elena's hands tightly. Promise me that much. I promise, Elena said, pressing a kiss to her mother's cheek, before turning toward the winding road that led east, away from Ashwood, away from Damien, away from every painful memory tied to the life she had once believed was waiting for her. The morning air was crisp and cool, the sky overhead a pale, hopeful blue after days of heavy rain. Elena walked steadily, her thoughts a tangled mixture of grief, anger, and a stubborn flicker of determination to build something new for herself, far from the wreckage Damien had left behind. She did not look back at the village growing smaller behind her, refusing to give herself the chance to second-guess a decision she had already fully committed to. She had traveled perhaps 3 hours, the sun climbing higher, and the road growing increasingly unfamiliar, when she first noticed the unsettling silence pressing in around her. The birdsong that had accompanied her earlier journey had faded entirely, replaced by an eerie stillness that raised the fine hairs along the back of her neck. Elena slowed her pace, glancing warily into the dense tree line flanking either side of the road, her senses sharpening with the instinctive caution bred into every wolf raised among packlands. Something was watching her. She could feel it, the same way she could feel an oncoming storm in the pressure of the air, though she could see nothing among the shadows of the trees to confirm her growing unease. She quickened her pace, gripping the strap of her bag tightly, silently cursing herself for not requesting an escort despite her fierce independence, and her desire to leave Ashwood without further complication or delay. Unbeknownst to Elena, several miles behind her, a small group of riders had already set out from the inn where Cade had been staying, following the same eastern road at a discreet distance, their presence carefully hidden among the natural cover of the surrounding forest. Cade rode at the head of the group, his expression grim and focused, an unfamiliar knot of protective urgency tightening in his chest with every mile that passed. He did not yet know precisely what danger awaited on the road ahead, but something deep within him, some instinct sharper and more insistent than mere curiosity, told him that Elena Voss was about to need help far sooner than either of them expected, and he intended to be close enough to provide it. The attack came without warning, the way true danger always does. One moment Elena was alone on the quiet forest road, her senses straining against the unnatural silence around her. The next, 3 figures emerged from the trees ahead, blocking her path with the casual confidence of men who had done this many times before. They were rogue wolves, unaffiliated with any pack, their clothing worn and travel-stained, their eyes carrying the hard, hungry look of people who had long ago abandoned any code of honor. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs as she took an instinctive step backward, her mind racing through every possible option, even as her body prepared instinctively to shift. "Well now," the tallest of the 3 said, a slow, unpleasant smile spreading across his face as he looked her over. "A lone traveler, all dressed for a journey. You are a long way from any pack protection, little wolf." "I have nothing of value," Elena said, keeping her voice steady, despite the fear coiling tight in her chest. "You would be wasting your time." "We will decide what has value," another of the men said, circling slowly, to cut off any potential escape route behind her. "Pretty face like that, strong scent like that, I think you are worth quite a lot." Elena did not wait for them to close the distance further. She turned and bolted, her wedding gown long since traded for practical traveling clothes that allowed her the freedom to run at full speed. But the men were fast, and they knew the terrain far better than she did, quickly cutting off her escape into the surrounding trees. She was forced back onto the road, breathing hard, her back pressed against the rough bark of an ancient oak as the 3 rogues closed in around her. She had begun to shift, feeling the familiar rush of heat spreading through her limbs as her body prepared to defend itself in wolf form. when the sound of thundering hooves suddenly broke through the tense silence of the forest. A rider burst through the tree line at full gallop, dark cloak billowing behind him, moving with a speed and precision that seemed almost impossible. Before the rogue wolves could fully register the threat, the rider had dismounted in a single fluid motion, moving between Elena and her attackers, with a controlled, lethal grace that immediately shifted the entire balance of the confrontation. It was Cade, though his face remained partially obscured beneath the hood of his cloak, and Elena, still trembling with adrenaline, did not immediately recognize him as the stranger from the courtyard. "Leave," Cade said, his voice carrying an authority so absolute that even the rogue wolves hesitated, some deep instinct within them, recognizing power far beyond their own despite his concealed identity. "This is your only warning." The tallest rogue sneered, unwilling to back down in front of his companions. "There are 3 of us, and 1 of you, stranger. I think the odds favor our side of this conversation." He was wrong, and the confrontation that followed proved it swiftly and decisively. Cade moved with a speed that seemed to blur the space between one heartbeat and the next, disarming the first rogue before the man could even react, sending him sprawling into the underbrush with a single controlled strike. The second attacker lunged forward, only to find himself pinned against a nearby tree, the fight gone out of him within seconds. The third, recognizing the hopelessness of the situation, turned and fled into the forest without a backward glance, quickly followed by his 2 battered companions scrambling to escape. The entire confrontation had lasted less than a minute. Elena stood frozen against the oak tree, staring at her rescuer with wide, disbelieving eyes as he turned to face her, lowering the hood of his cloak, just enough for her to catch a glimpse of familiar amber eyes. "The stranger from the courtyard. I happened to be traveling this same road," Cade said, offering an explanation that was technically true, even if it carefully avoided the full weight of the circumstances that had actually brought him here. "It seems fortunate timing that I arrived when I did." Elena's legs finally gave out from beneath her, the adrenaline of the encounter draining away all at once, leaving her shaking and unsteady. Cade caught her before she could fall, his hands gentle but firm on her shoulders, as he guided her down onto a fallen log at the edge of the road. "Breathe," he said quietly, crouching beside her. "You are safe now. They are gone." It took several long minutes for Elena's racing heart to settle, for the trembling in her hands to finally subside. When she finally looked up at Cade again, gratitude mixed with wary confusion in her expression. "Thank you," she said softly. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not arrived when you did." "You do not need to think about that," Cade said. "What matters now is that you are safe." "Why were you on this road?" Elena asked, studying him carefully. "You said in the courtyard that you were simply passing through. It seems like quite the coincidence that our paths crossed twice within a matter of days." Cade hesitated, weighing his words carefully. He was unwilling to lie outright, yet equally unwilling to reveal the full truth of his identity and his growing, still poorly understood fascination with her. "I heard, through casual conversation at the inn where I was staying, that a woman was traveling this road alone," he said, which was, again, not entirely untrue. "Something told me it would be wise to follow at a distance, simply to ensure her safety." Elena raised an eyebrow, clearly suspicious of the vague explanation, though exhaustion and lingering fear kept her from pressing the matter further in that moment. "Well, whatever your reasons, I am deeply grateful. You saved my life today." "Where were you traveling?" Cade asked, rising and offering his hand to help her up from the log. "East," Elena said, accepting his hand and allowing him to pull her to her feet. "Toward my aunt's territory in the hills, though after what just happened, I am reconsidering the wisdom of traveling that road alone any further." "Then allow me to accompany you," Cade offered, his tone carefully casual, despite the urgency beating beneath his words. "At least until you reach somewhere safe. I have no pressing schedule that cannot accommodate a slight delay." Elena studied him for a long moment, weighing the offer against the instinctive caution that still lingered from the day's terror, and against the strange, undeniable pull she had felt toward this stranger since their very first meeting in the rain-soaked courtyard. Something about him, despite the secrecy surrounding his identity, felt fundamentally trustworthy in a way she could not fully articulate. "I would appreciate that," she finally said, "though I should warn you, I am poor company at the moment. My life has rather fallen apart in the past few days." "Then perhaps we are well matched," Cade said, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time since their meeting. I find myself with rather a lot on my own mind these days as well. They set off together down the eastern road, Cade leading his horse by the reins as they walked side by side, the tension of the earlier attack gradually giving way to a strange, comfortable quiet between them. Elena found herself sneaking glances at her mysterious companion throughout the afternoon, curiosity building steadily despite her better judgment. "You never told me your name," she said eventually, as the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, casting long golden shadows across the forest road. Cade considered the question carefully. Using his true name felt like too great a risk this early, too likely to spark recognition even among those who had never met him personally, given how widely his name and reputation had spread across the northern territories. "You may call me Ash," he said, borrowing loosely from his family name, close enough to feel honest, distant enough to protect the fuller truth. "Ash," Elena repeated, testing the name. "It suits you somehow. Quiet, but with something burning underneath." Cade felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest at her observation, more perceptive than she likely realized. "And you are Elena," he said. "I heard your name spoken during the ceremony." "Elena Voss," she confirmed. "Though after this week, I am seriously considering whether I ought to adopt an entirely new name, along with an entirely new life." "There is nothing wrong with the name Elena Voss," Cade said firmly. "The failures of one foolish man do not diminish your worth, nor do they require you to erase yourself to move forward." Elena glanced at him, surprised by the quiet conviction in his words. "You speak as though you understand something about starting over yourself." "Perhaps I do," Cade said simply, offering nothing further, though the weight behind his words suggested depths of experience he was not yet ready to share. As dusk settled over the forest, and the road ahead grew increasingly difficult to navigate safely, Cade suggested they make camp for the night in a small clearing just off the main path, sheltered by a ring of tall pines that would help conceal their fire from any further danger. Elena agreed readily, exhaustion from the day's events finally catching up with her fully. As they sat together beside the small campfire that evening, the events of the wedding, the attack, and the strange, quiet comfort of this unexpected companion, all swirling together in her mind, Elena found herself, for the first time since the disaster at the altar, feeling something that almost resembled peace. She did not yet understand the depth of the connection forming between them, nor the truth hidden carefully behind the simple name Ash, but something told her, deep in the quiet corners of her heart still healing from betrayal, that this chance meeting on a dangerous forest road might prove far more significant than she could yet imagine. The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm, as Elena and the man she knew only as Ash continued their journey east together. What had begun as a cautious, wary alliance forged out of necessity, slowly transformed into something warmer, something neither of them had anticipated when their paths first crossed in that rain-soaked courtyard. They traveled slowly, deliberately, taking the safer but longer route through open farmland, rather than risking the dense forest roads again after the attack. Elena found herself grateful for the extra time, though she would not have admitted it easily. Each evening, as they made camp beneath the open sky, she found herself talking more freely with Ash than she had spoken with anyone in years, the careful walls she had built around her heart slowly beginning to crack open. "Tell me about him," Ash said one evening, as they sat beside their small campfire, watching the stars emerge overhead. "The man who left you at the altar, you do not have to, if the memory is too painful." Elena was quiet for a long moment, poking absently at the fire with a small stick. "Damien and I grew up together," she finally said. "We were paired as fated mates when I was 16, and everyone assumed our path forward was simply a matter of time. I loved him, or at least I believed I did. I spent years building a future around the assumption that we would eventually stand together, lead together, grow old together. And instead he chose someone else," Ash said quietly. "He chose someone else," Elena confirmed, bitterness creeping faintly into her voice. "And the worst part is not even the rejection itself, though that hurt more than I can properly express. The worst part is realizing how much of myself I built around a future that was never real. I do not know who I am anymore, outside of being the woman Damien rejected." Ash studied her carefully across the flickering firelight, something protective and fierce stirring behind his amber eyes. You are far more than that, Elena. You survived a public humiliation most people would have crumbled beneath, and you did it with more grace and strength than I have seen from warriors twice your size. That is who you are. Not a woman defined by another man's failure to recognize what he had. Elena felt her throat tighten, unexpected tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. You have a way of saying exactly the right thing, at exactly the right moment, she said softly. It is a rather dangerous quality in a traveling companion. Dangerous how? Ash asked, a faint smile touching his lips. Dangerous, because it makes it very difficult to keep my guard up around you, Elena admitted, surprising herself with her own honesty. And after everything that has happened, I promised myself I would not let anyone close again so quickly. The admission hung in the air between them, charged with a tension neither fully understood, both of them suddenly acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how the firelight danced across each other's faces, how the pull between them had grown steadily stronger with every mile of shared road. Ash wanted, more than almost anything he had wanted in years, to reveal his true identity in that moment, to tell her exactly who he was, and exactly what he suspected might be growing between them. But he held back, the political weight of the truth pressing heavily against his tongue. Revealing himself now, especially given the fragile situation with Ashwood and the alliance still being negotiated, could complicate matters beyond repair. He needed more time. He needed to be certain, for both their sakes, that whatever was growing between them was real, and not simply the product of a chaotic, emotionally charged circumstance. For what it is worth, he said instead, carefully steering the conversation to safer ground, I do not think allowing someone close again makes you weak, Elena. I think it makes you brave. Far braver than most people manage after being hurt so deeply. Elena studied him for a long moment, something warm and cautiously hopeful blooming in her chest, despite her best efforts to guard against it. You still have not told me much about yourself, she said, deliberately shifting the conversation. I have shared my entire humiliating story with you, and you remain almost entirely a mystery. Ash felt the familiar tension return, the careful balance he had been maintaining between honesty and necessary secrecy, growing more difficult to sustain with each passing day. There is not much to tell, he said carefully. I carry significant responsibilities, more than most people my age typically shoulder. Sometimes those responsibilities require me to keep certain matters private, at least for a time. That sounds rather ominous, Elena said, though her tone remained light, teasing even, despite the genuine curiosity beneath her words. It is simply complicated, Ash said. I promise you, Elena, that when the time is right, I will share everything. I only ask for your patience in the meantime. Elena considered this for a moment, something in his sincere expression convincing her, despite every instinct telling her caution, that his secrecy was not born of malice or deception meant to harm her. Very well, she said finally. I will trust you, at least for now, though I hope you understand that trust has become rather difficult for me to extend freely these days. I understand completely, Ash said, relief evident in his voice. And I promise you will not regret extending it to me. Their journey continued over the following days, the bond between them deepening with each shared meal, each quiet evening beside the fire, each small moment of comfort offered during difficult stretches of the road. Elena found herself laughing again, genuinely laughing, for the first time since the disaster at the altar, surprised by how naturally joy returned to her in Ash's company, despite the heaviness still lingering from her broken engagement. Meanwhile, several miles behind them, word had begun spreading through official channels that the Alpha King had been absent from his duties far longer than originally planned, his prolonged silence sparking growing concern among his advisors and unwanted speculation among rival territories eager to exploit any perceived weakness in his leadership. Callum, who had been managing affairs in Cade's absence with growing difficulty, finally dispatched a small group of trusted riders to locate his king and remind him, gently but firmly, of the responsibilities awaiting his return. The riders found Cade and Elena on the 6th day of their journey together, approaching their small camp at dawn with careful discretion, though not carefully enough to avoid Elena's notice entirely. She woke to the sound of hushed voices near the tree line, quickly recognizing that whoever had arrived clearly knew Ash, and knew him with a level of deference that struck her as distinctly unusual for a simple traveler. She watched, still partially hidden within her bedroll, as the riders addressed Ash with careful respect, their postures subtly deferential, in a way that immediately raised her suspicions. She could not hear the full conversation from her distance, but she caught fragments, enough to understand that something significant was being discussed, something involving responsibilities and delays, and matters requiring urgent attention. When Ash returned to the camp a short while later, his expression carefully composed but carrying an undeniable weight of concealed tension, Elena studied him carefully, her earlier trust warring against the sudden resurgence of doubt. "Who were those men?" she asked, keeping her voice deliberately casual despite the questions racing through her mind. "Associates of mine," Ash said, the answer technically true but frustratingly vague. "They came to discuss some matters requiring my attention." "They called you by a different title," Elena pressed gently, unwilling to simply let the matter drop. "I could not make out the full word, but it did not sound like a name a simple traveler would typically carry." Ash felt the careful foundation of trust they had built over the past week suddenly teetering on the edge of collapse, and he knew, with growing certainty, that the time for continued secrecy was rapidly running out. But he was not yet ready, not with the political complications still unresolved, not with his own uncertainty about the depth of what he felt for her still needing further clarity, before he risked everything by revealing the truth. "Elena," he said carefully, "I promise you that everything will be explained soon. I only ask for a little more time." Elena studied him for a long moment, torn between the instinct urging her toward caution and the equally strong instinct telling her that whatever secret Ash was carrying, it was not born of cruelty or deception meant to harm her. She thought of Damien, of the months of hidden betrayal that had led to her public humiliation, and felt a familiar cold fear settle into her chest. "I have already been deceived once by someone I trusted completely," she said quietly. "I do not know if I have the strength to survive being deceived again." "I am not deceiving you," Ash said firmly, closing the distance between them and taking her hands gently in his own. "I am protecting something, yes, for reasons more complicated than I can fully explain right now. But I am not lying to you about who I am at my core, Elena. Everything I have shown you these past days, every moment of comfort and connection between us, has been entirely real." Elena searched his face for a long moment, torn between hope and hard-earned caution, before finally allowing herself to nod slowly. "I want to believe you," she said softly. "I am simply frightened of what it will cost me if I am wrong." "You will not be wrong," Ash said, though even as he spoke the words, a knot of uncertainty tightened in his own chest, aware of just how much still hung precariously in the balance between them, and how quickly everything could shatter the moment the full truth finally came to light. Callum found Cade alone near the edge of the camp later that morning, staring out across the rolling farmland with an expression of deep, unresolved conflict etched across his usually composed features. The riders had delivered their message clearly enough, urgent enough that even Cade could no longer justify further delay. His absence had stretched from days into nearly 2 weeks, and matters requiring the Alpha King's direct attention had begun accumulating at court in ways that could not be ignored indefinitely. "The council grows restless," Callum said, joining his friend at the edge of the field. "There are whispers already, Cade, rumors that you have gone soft, that some woman has captured your attention so completely, you have forgotten your duties entirely." "Let them whisper," Cade said, though the tension in his jaw betrayed how deeply the words had landed, despite his attempt at indifference. "I would let them whisper if it were only idle gossip," Callum said, his tone growing more serious. "But you know as well as I do, that rival territories are watching closely for any sign of weakness, especially now, with the Ashwood alliance still hanging in uncertain balance. Your prolonged absence sends a message, whether you intend it to or not." Cade exhaled slowly, running a hand through his dark hair in frustration. "I know, Callum. I am not blind to the political weight of my choices. But I cannot simply abandon Elena on this road, not after everything that has happened, not when I still do not fully understand what is happening between us." "Then perhaps it is time to stop hiding behind the name Ash, and simply tell her the truth," Callum suggested. "You cannot continue balancing both worlds indefinitely, my friend. Eventually, something will have to give." Cade knew his friend was right, though the knowledge did little to ease the tangled uncertainty still gripping his thoughts. He had spent the past week discovering more about himself through his growing connection with Elena than he had learned in years of careful, guarded leadership. Her strength, her quiet resilience in the face of devastating betrayal, her sharp wit and genuine warmth once her guard began to lower, had stirred something within him he had genuinely believed himself incapable of feeling. Yet the mate bond, that ancient and rarely understood connection between wolves, destined for one another, remained frustratingly unclear in his own senses. He had felt undeniable pulls toward her, moments of recognition that defied simple explanation, yet nothing as immediate or absolute as the stories described. He wondered, with growing unease, whether what he felt for Elena was something separate from fate entirely, a choice born purely of genuine affection rather than any predetermined bond. "I need more time," Cade finally said. "A little longer, Callum. I will return to court soon, I promise you that. But I cannot leave things unresolved with Elena, not after everything she has already endured." Callum studied his friend for a long moment before nodding slowly, understanding, even if reluctantly, the weight of what Cade was grappling with. "You have perhaps another week before the council's patience runs out entirely," he warned. "Use it wisely, Cade, and be careful. A woman who has just survived one devastating betrayal deserves honesty, not further deception, no matter how well-intentioned your reasons for secrecy might be." The warning settled uneasily in Cade's chest as he watched Callum and the other riders depart, leaving him alone once more with his thoughts and the quiet camp where Elena still waited. He returned to find her sitting near the dying embers of their morning fire, her expression thoughtful, distant, clearly still processing the unusual visit from his associates. "Everything is resolved for now," he said, settling down beside her. "Are you going to tell me who you really are?" Elena asked directly, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "I have spent the past week growing genuinely close to you, Ash, or whatever your true name might be. I think I deserve honesty, especially given everything I have already survived." Cade felt the weight of her words settle heavily against his conscience. She was right, entirely right, and he knew that continuing to withhold the truth any longer would only deepen the eventual damage when the full reality finally emerged. Yet something held him back still, a lingering fear that the revelation of his true identity would fundamentally alter the genuine, uncomplicated connection they had built, replacing it with the careful diplomacy and calculated distance that inevitably accompanied his royal title. "Soon," he said finally, hating the word even as he spoke it. "I promise you, Elena. Soon I will tell you everything. But please understand that my reasons for waiting are not born of any desire to deceive you. There are complications tied to my identity that extend far beyond simple personal preference." Elena studied him for a long, searching moment, weighing his words against the growing unease still churning within her. "I want to trust you," she finally said, "but I need you to understand something clearly. If I discover later that this secrecy was hiding something that directly harms me, something you deliberately concealed to protect yourself rather than to protect something genuinely necessary, I will not forgive it easily." "I understand," Cade said quietly. "And I promise you, when the truth finally comes to light, you will understand why I waited." They continued their journey together over the following days, the earlier ease between them now tinged with a subtle undercurrent of tension neither could fully ignore. Elena found herself watching Ash more carefully, noticing small details she had previously overlooked, the way he carried himself with an unconscious authority uncommon among ordinary travelers, the way even strangers they encountered along the road seemed to instinctively defer to him, without fully understanding why. One evening, as they stopped in a small trading town to purchase additional supplies for the remainder of their journey, Elena watched from a short distance as a local merchant, upon catching a glimpse of Ash's face beneath his hood, suddenly paled and dropped into an awkward, hurried bow, before quickly composing himself and pretending the moment had never occurred. Ash quickly steered their conversation elsewhere, but Elena had seen enough to confirm her growing suspicions. "That merchant recognized you," she said quietly, once they had left the shop, unable to hold back the observation any longer. Ash's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps he simply mistook me for someone else." "Ash," Elena said, stopping in the middle of the street and turning to face him directly, her patience finally reaching its limit. "I am not a fool. Something is happening here that goes far beyond a simple traveler with private matters to attend to. I have watched you carefully these past days, and everything about you, the way people react to you, the way your associates addressed you, the confidence you carry, none of it fits the story you have told me. Cade felt the weight of the moment pressing down heavily upon him, recognizing that the careful balance he had been maintaining could no longer hold. Yet even as the truth hovered on the edge of his tongue, ready to finally emerge, the sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted the moment entirely, drawing both their attention toward the edge of the small town, where a new group of riders had just arrived, their formal uniforms unmistakably marking them as royal guards from the northern capital. Elena watched, confusion and dawning suspicion mingling on her face, as the guards dismounted and approached Ash with unmistakable formality, dropping into respectful bows before him in full view of the gathering crowd of curious townsfolk. "Your Majesty," the lead guard said, his voice carrying clearly across the small square, "we have urgent matters from the capital, requiring your immediate attention." The words hung in the air, undeniable and inescapable, finally revealing the truth Elena had been slowly piecing together over the past several days. She turned to stare at Ash, her expression shifting rapidly from confusion to stunned disbelief, as the full weight of the revelation settled fully into place. "Your Majesty," she repeated slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, "you are not simply a traveler, are you? You are the Alpha King." Cade closed his eyes briefly, the moment he had been dreading and delaying for over a week, finally arriving in the worst possible circumstances, stripped of any careful control over how the truth would be revealed. When he opened his eyes again, meeting Elena's stunned, hurt gaze directly, he saw the beginnings of a betrayal settling into her expression that mirrored, painfully, the very wound Damien had inflicted only weeks earlier. "Elena," he began carefully, "please allow me to explain." But Elena had already taken a step backward, her arms crossing protectively over her chest, as the walls she had so carefully begun lowering over the past week slammed firmly shut once more. "You lied to me," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and profound hurt. "For over a week, Cade, or whoever you truly are, you let me believe I was speaking with a simple traveler, while the entire time you were concealing something this significant. I did not lie about who I am at my core," Cade said, desperation creeping into his voice, as he watched the trust they had built together crumbling rapidly before him. "Everything else was real, Elena. Every conversation, every moment of comfort, every piece of myself I shared with you was genuine. Except the single most important detail," Elena shot back, tears now shining visibly in her eyes despite her clear effort to hold them back. "I have already survived one devastating deception this month, Cade. I cannot survive another, especially not from someone I allowed myself to trust so completely." She turned and walked away from him then, disappearing into the gathering crowd of curious townsfolk, before Cade could formulate any response capable of bridging the sudden, painful distance now separating them. He stood frozen in the small square, the royal guards waiting patiently nearby, the weight of his concealed identity finally exacting its inevitable cost, wondering with growing dread whether he had just destroyed, through his own careful secrecy, the one genuine connection that had ever truly felt like fate. Elena did not go far. She had nowhere else to go. No coin sufficient for lodging in an unfamiliar town. No plan beyond the sudden, overwhelming need to put distance between herself and the man who had spent over a week concealing the truth of his identity from her. She found herself seated on a low stone wall at the edge of the town square, staring blankly at the cobblestones beneath her feet, while the noise of the gathering crowd faded into a distant, meaningless hum. The Alpha King. She had been traveling, laughing, confiding her deepest wounds to the single most powerful man in all the northern territories, and he had allowed her to believe he was simply a passing traveler named Ash. The betrayal cut deeper than she had expected, not because his position frightened her, but because the deception itself echoed so painfully close to what Damien had done, hiding a fundamental truth behind careful smiles and comforting words, while she remained oblivious to the reality unfolding around her. She did not know how long she sat there before Cade finally approached, having dismissed the royal guards to give them privacy for the conversation he knew could no longer be delayed. He stopped a respectful distance away, giving her space, though the desperate need to explain himself was etched clearly across his features. "I know you are angry," he said quietly. "You have every right to be. But please, allow me to explain the reasons behind my silence, and then, if you still wish to walk away, I will not stop you." Elena remained silent for a long moment, her jaw tight, before finally giving a small, reluctant nod. "You have 5 minutes," she said. "Make them count." Cade sat down carefully on the opposite end of the stone wall, keeping a respectful distance between them, despite every instinct urging him to close the gap entirely. "I came to Ashwood territory to quietly observe the pack's leadership before finalizing an important alliance," he began. "I was meant to remain unseen, unrecognized, simply gathering information. Revealing my identity that early would have compromised the entire purpose of my visit, and potentially the alliance itself, which affects the safety and stability of thousands of people across both territories." "That explains your presence at the ceremony," Elena said, her voice still carrying a sharp edge. "It does not explain why you continued the deception for over a week afterward, while we traveled together, while I shared things with you I have not shared with anyone else." "Because I did not know how to tell you," Cade admitted, his voice dropping lower, more vulnerable than Elena had yet heard it. "Every day that passed, our connection grew deeper, and every day, the thought of revealing my title terrified me more. Not because I feared your reaction exactly, but because I feared it would change everything between us. I feared you would begin seeing me only as the Alpha King, weighed down by politics and expectation, rather than simply as a man who genuinely cared for you." Elena's expression softened, almost imperceptibly, though the hurt remained clearly visible beneath the surface. "You should have trusted me with the truth regardless," she said. "I deserved the choice to decide how I felt about your title, rather than having that choice taken from me through continued silence." "You are right," Cade said simply. "I made an error in judgment, one I deeply regret. I was so afraid of losing what we were building that I nearly guaranteed losing it through my own cowardice instead." The word cowardice hung heavily in the air between them, an unintentional echo of the very accusation Elena had leveled at Damien only weeks earlier. Cade seemed to recognize the parallel himself, his expression tightening with genuine remorse. "I am not asking you to forgive me immediately," he continued. "I only ask that you understand my reasons were born of fear rather than malice, and that everything else I have shown you these past days, every moment of genuine connection between us, remains entirely true, regardless of the title I carry." Elena was quiet for a long moment, processing his words carefully against the raw wound still throbbing from Damien's betrayal only weeks prior. The situations were different, she reminded herself slowly. Damien had chosen someone else entirely, building a secret relationship behind her back for the express purpose of eventually humiliating her. Cade's secrecy, however frustrating and however deeply it had hurt her trust, had been born of an entirely different fear. A fear of losing something genuine, rather than a desire to replace her with someone else. "I need time," she finally said. "I cannot simply forgive this and move forward as though nothing happened. But I also recognize that your reasons, however poorly executed, were not born of the same cruelty Damien showed me." "That is more understanding than I likely deserve right now," Cade said quietly. "Take whatever time you need, Elena. I will not pressure you further." Over the following days, as Elena grappled with the weight of this new revelation, she found herself observing Cade with fresh eyes, noticing details about his behavior that made sudden, startling sense in light of his true identity. The quiet authority he carried, the way he had handled the rogue wolves during the attack with such swift, decisive skill, the deference shown by strangers who recognized him despite his careful attempts at anonymity, all of it fit together now into a picture far larger than the simple traveler she had believed him to be. She also found herself, somewhat reluctantly, unable to fully extinguish the deep connection that had grown between them, despite the painful revelation. Cade remained patient throughout her period of careful reconsideration, never pressuring her, never demanding forgiveness before she was ready to offer it, simply remaining present and honest in every interaction that followed, as though determined to prove through consistent action what his earlier silence had failed to demonstrate through words. Meanwhile, word of the Alpha King's extended absence and his mysterious traveling companion had begun spreading through official channels far more widely than either of them realized. Rumors reached Ashwood territory within days, carried by traveling merchants and gossiping messengers eager to share such significant news. Damien, still preparing for his own upcoming ceremony with Lauren Blake, received the news with a mixture of disbelief and, to his own surprise, an unexpected flicker of something uncomfortably close to jealousy. "The Alpha King," Damien muttered, staring at the messenger who had delivered the rumor. "Traveling with Elena. That cannot possibly be accurate. The reports seem quite consistent, the messenger replied carefully. Multiple witnesses in the trading town confirmed the Alpha King's identity was revealed in her presence, and that they had been traveling together for over a week prior to that revelation. Damien dismissed the messenger with a curt wave, though the news continued gnawing uncomfortably at him, long after the man had departed. He told himself the discomfort was simple concern for Elena's well-being, nothing more, yet the persistent unease refused to fully settle, a small, unwelcome reminder of feelings he had believed himself entirely free from once he chose Lauren over the woman fate had originally intended for him. Lauren, for her part, noticed Damien's distracted mood over the following days, his responses growing increasingly short, his attention frequently drifting during conversations that should have held his full focus as their own ceremony approached. She said nothing directly, though a quiet, growing unease settled into her own heart, wondering whether the foundation of their relationship was truly as solid as she had believed it to be. Back on the road, Elena and Cade continued their journey east, the earlier tension between them gradually softening, as days passed without further deception, without further secrets, held carefully out of reach. On the evening of the fourth day following the revelation, as they sat together beside their campfire beneath a clear, star-filled sky, Elena finally broke the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "I think I am ready to hear the rest," she said quietly. "Everything you have not yet told me. Your full history, your responsibilities, everything that comes with the title you carry." Cade felt a cautious hope stir within his chest at her words, recognizing the significance of what she was offering him. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Once I share this fully, there will be no simple path back to the uncomplicated beginning we once had." "I do not want simple," Elena said, meeting his gaze steadily across the flickering firelight. "I want honest. Whatever complications come with your title, I would rather face them with full knowledge than continue building something on incomplete truths." And so, beneath that star-filled sky, Cade finally shared with her the full weight of his responsibilities, the political pressures constantly bearing down upon him, the fragile alliance with Ashwood, still requiring careful navigation, and, most significantly, the growing certainty within his own heart that the strange, undeniable pull he had felt toward her, since that very first meeting in the rain-soaked courtyard, was something far deeper than simple attraction, something that felt, with each passing day, increasingly like the mate bond the old stories described, awakening slowly and unmistakably between them, despite every obstacle working to keep them apart. The revelation of a possible mate bond settled over their small campsite with a weight that neither Elena nor Cade had fully anticipated. Elena sat quietly for a long while after he finished speaking, processing not only the enormity of his position as Alpha King, but the far more personal implication that fate itself might have intended them for one another, arriving in her life at the exact moment her previous bond had been so publicly and painfully severed. "How can you be certain?" she finally asked, her voice carrying a careful blend of curiosity and lingering caution. "Mate bonds are supposed to be immediate, undeniable, are they not? I felt nothing so definitive when I first saw you in the courtyard, only a strange pull I could not fully explain." "That same strange, undeniable pull is precisely what I felt as well," Cade said. "The old stories describe the bond differently, depending on circumstance. For some, it strikes instantly and completely. For others, particularly for those whose hearts have already been claimed and broken once before, the bond reveals itself more gradually, growing stronger as trust and genuine connection build between two people meant for each other." Elena considered this carefully, memories of the past 2 weeks flooding back through her mind with fresh significance. The inexplicable comfort she had felt in his presence from their very first meeting, the way her heart had raced upon seeing him again on the forest road, the sense of safety that had settled over her the moment he appeared to defend her against the rogue wolves, the steady, growing warmth that had built between them with each passing day of their journey together, despite her every intention to guard her heart carefully after Damien's betrayal. "I do not know if I am ready to fully trust in another mate bond," Elena admitted honestly. "The last time fate declared someone my destined partner, it led me to public humiliation and heartbreak. I am not certain I have the courage to place my faith in fate again so soon." "I understand that fear completely," Cade said gently. "But I want you to know, Elena, that whatever exists between us, I do not wish for you to accept it simply because fate demands it. I want you to choose it, freely and completely, built on genuine trust and connection, rather than obligation alone. If the bond between us is real, it will remain real, regardless of how much time you need to feel certain of your own heart. His words settled something deep within Elena's chest, a quiet reassurance that stood in stark contrast to the forced expectations she had carried throughout her relationship with Damien. She had spent years assuming their eventual union simply because fate declared it should be so, never truly questioning whether the foundation between them was built on genuine choice or simple inevitability. Cade's willingness to allow her the freedom to choose, rather than simply expecting her acceptance, meant more to her than she could easily express. "Thank you," she said softly, "for understanding that." Their journey continued over the following days, the newfound honesty between them, creating a foundation far sturdier than anything Elena had shared with Damien throughout their years together. Yet even as their bond deepened, the looming reality of Cade's responsibilities as Alpha King grew increasingly difficult to postpone. Callum's warning echoed persistently in the back of Cade's mind, the council's patience wearing thinner with each passing day of his continued absence. On the 7th day following the revelation of his identity, a second group of royal messengers arrived at their camp, their expressions grave and urgent, in a manner that immediately signaled trouble far more significant than simple administrative delays. "Your Majesty," the lead messenger said, dropping into a hurried bow, "the council requests your immediate return to the capital. There are matters concerning the Ashwood Alliance that require your direct intervention. Word has spread throughout the northern territories regarding your extended absence, and rival factions are beginning to question your commitment to your duties." Cade's expression tightened with concern. "What specifically has occurred?" "The Ashwood Pack elders have grown anxious," the messenger continued. "They fear your prolonged silence signals a withdrawal of interest in the alliance entirely, and there are whispers that certain rival territories are attempting to exploit this uncertainty by offering alternative arrangements. If the situation is not addressed swiftly, the entire alliance may collapse, along with the stability it was meant to secure across both territories." Cade felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle heavily across his shoulders, the reality of his position reasserting itself after weeks spent largely free from its constant demands. He glanced toward Elena, torn between the urgent needs of his kingdom and his reluctance to leave her so soon after they had finally built genuine, unguarded trust between them. "I must return to the capital immediately," he said, turning back to the messenger. "Prepare the horses. We depart within the hour." "We, Your Majesty?" the messenger asked, glancing uncertainly toward Elena. "Elena travels with me," Cade said firmly, leaving no room for argument. "She will be given proper accommodation and protection at the capital, for as long as she wishes to remain." Elena, who had been listening to the exchange with growing apprehension, stepped forward carefully. "Cade, I do not wish to complicate your return to your duties. Perhaps it would be wiser for me to continue on to my aunt's territory as originally planned, and allow you to focus fully on resolving matters with the Alliance." "I do not want you traveling further without proper protection," Cade said, "and I do not wish to be separated from you so soon, not when we have only just begun to build something honest between us. Please, Elena, come with me to the capital, at least until matters with the Alliance are properly resolved. After that, whatever you decide about your future, I will support you fully." Elena hesitated, weighing the practical concerns of appearing at the royal capital as an unofficial guest of the Alpha King, against her own genuine desire to remain close to Cade during this uncertain, delicate period in both their lives. Ultimately, the pull she felt toward him, and her own reluctance to simply walk away from something that felt increasingly significant, outweighed her hesitation. "Very well," she said. "I will come with you." The journey to the capital took another 3 days of hard, steady travel, the relaxed pace of their earlier journey, replaced by an urgency befitting the political stakes now hanging in the balance. Elena watched, with growing fascination and no small amount of trepidation, as Cade transformed gradually before her eyes, from the quiet, gentle traveling companion she had come to know, into the commanding, authoritative Alpha King his people depended upon, issuing clear directives to his guards, discussing complex political strategy with Callum, carrying himself with an unmistakable weight of leadership that had remained carefully hidden during their time on the open road. When they finally arrived at the grand capital city, its towering stone walls and bustling streets, a stark contrast to the quiet forests and farmland they had traveled through together. Elena felt the full reality of Cade's position settle over her for the first time, with genuine, overwhelming clarity. This was not simply a man she had grown close to during a chance meeting on a difficult road. This was the ruler of an entire kingdom, a man whose every decision carried consequences reaching far beyond the two of them. As they passed through the grand gates and into the bustling capital, curious eyes immediately turned toward them, whispers rippling through the crowd at the sight of their Alpha King returning after such an unusually extended absence, accompanied by an unfamiliar woman whose identity clearly sparked immediate speculation. Elena straightened her spine instinctively, drawing on the same quiet strength that had carried her through the devastating humiliation at her own failed wedding, refusing to let the weight of curious stares diminish her composure now. Yet even as she held her head high, walking beside Cade through the heart of his kingdom, a familiar unease began building steadily within her chest. She had entered a world of political complexity and public scrutiny, far beyond anything she had previously experienced, and she knew, with growing certainty, that the true test of whatever fate had woven between herself and Cade Ashbourne was only just beginning. The royal palace was unlike anything Elena had ever experienced, its soaring stone towers and expansive gardens a testament to generations of careful construction and unimaginable wealth. She was given a comfortable set of private rooms overlooking the eastern gardens, along with a small staff to attend to her needs, a level of luxury that felt simultaneously wondrous and deeply disorienting after weeks spent traveling with only a modest pack of belongings. Cade, meanwhile, threw himself immediately into the pressing matters awaiting his return, spending long hours in council meetings addressing the concerns surrounding the Ashwood alliance and the broader implications of his extended absence. Elena saw little of him during those first few days, though he made a point of visiting her briefly each evening, however exhausted, to share a quiet meal and reassure her that his feelings toward her remained unchanged, despite the demands now consuming his attention. The council, however, proved far less welcoming of Elena's presence than Cade himself. On the fourth morning following their arrival, Elena was summoned to a private meeting with several senior advisors, their expressions carefully neutral but their intentions unmistakably clear the moment the conversation began. "Miss Voss," began an older advisor named Roderick, his tone polite but pointed, "we understand that His Majesty has taken a personal interest in your well-being, following recent difficult circumstances in your home territory. However, we must express our concern regarding the appropriateness of your continued presence at the palace, particularly given the delicate nature of ongoing negotiations with Ashwood." "I am not entirely certain what you are implying," Elena said carefully, though she suspected quite clearly what direction the conversation was heading. "The Ashwood alliance depends heavily on maintaining goodwill between our territories," Roderick continued. "Your presence here, given the very public and rather scandalous circumstances of your broken engagement, risks complicating those negotiations significantly. Some among the Ashwood leadership may interpret His Majesty's involvement with you as an unwelcome intrusion into their internal pack matters." Elena felt a familiar flare of indignation rise within her chest, though she kept her expression carefully composed, refusing to let the advisor see how deeply his words had struck. "I did not ask to be brought here," she said evenly. "His Majesty extended the invitation, and I accepted out of genuine concern for my own safety after being attacked on the road. I have no intention of complicating any political negotiations." "Your intentions may be entirely innocent," another advisor added, "but intentions rarely matter in matters of politics, Miss Voss. Perception carries far greater weight than truth, in circumstances such as these." Elena left the meeting feeling shaken, the weight of the council's disapproval settling heavily over her despite her attempts to remain composed. When Cade returned to the palace that evening, exhausted from another long day of negotiations, she recounted the conversation to him with careful precision, watching his expression darken with each detail she shared. "They had no right to summon you without my knowledge," he said, anger evident beneath his controlled tone. "I will address this with the council directly." "Perhaps they are not entirely wrong to be concerned," Elena said quietly, surprising herself with the admission. "I have brought a certain amount of scandal with me, Cade, however unintentionally, and I do not wish to become a source of complication for something as significant as an alliance affecting thousands of people. You are not a complication, Cade said firmly, taking her hands in his own. You are the woman I intend to build a future alongside, regardless of what my council believes is politically convenient. I will not allow their discomfort to dictate the course of my own heart, Elena. Not after everything we have already overcome together. Despite his reassurance, the tension within the palace continued building steadily over the following weeks. Rumors of Elena's presence spread rapidly throughout the capital and beyond, eventually reaching Ashwood territory in increasingly distorted forms. Some versions of the story painted Elena as a scheming opportunist who had deliberately manipulated the Alpha King's sympathies following her public humiliation. Others suggested far more scandalous interpretations of the relationship, painting Cade as reckless and Elena as unworthy of such elevated attention. Damien, upon hearing these rumors, found himself increasingly distracted from his own upcoming ceremony with Lauren, an uncomfortable mixture of guilt and something uncomfortably close to jealousy gnawing steadily at his conscience. He began making inquiries through pack contacts regarding the veracity of the rumors, ostensibly out of concern for Elena's well-being, though the true motivation behind his growing preoccupation remained more complicated than he was willing to fully acknowledge, even to himself. Meanwhile, at the palace, Elena struggled with growing isolation, despite Cade's consistent efforts to make her feel welcome. The palace staff, though generally kind, remained visibly cautious around her, clearly uncertain how to navigate her uncertain status within the royal household. The council's disapproval, though never expressed directly to her face again, manifested in subtle exclusions from official gatherings and careful whispers that followed her through the palace corridors. It was during this difficult period that Elena received an unexpected letter from her mother, Marguerite, containing news that struck her with unexpected force. Damien's ceremony with Lauren Blake had been indefinitely postponed, the reasons unclear, though rumors within Ashwood suggested growing tension between Damien and the Pax Beta family regarding the timeline of the union. Elena read the letter twice, surprised by the complicated tangle of emotions the news stirred within her, relief mixed with something that felt uncomfortably close to lingering resentment she had believed herself already past. She shared the letter with Cade that evening, watching his expression carefully as he read through the news. "Does this trouble you?" he asked gently, setting the letter aside. "I am not certain," Elena admitted honestly. "I do not wish for Damien back, not after everything he put me through. But there is something unsettling about knowing his own path forward has grown uncertain, especially given everything happening here between us. I do not wish to become a source of ongoing complication in either of our lives. You are not responsible for the choices Damien made, nor for the consequences those choices continue to create," Cade said firmly. "Whatever difficulties he now faces are entirely of his own making, born from his own decision to publicly humiliate you rather than handle the matter with honesty and respect from the beginning." Elena nodded slowly, grateful for his steady reassurance, even as the underlying tension within the palace continued weighing heavily upon her. Over the following days, that tension finally reached a breaking point when Roderick, growing increasingly bold in his opposition, arranged a private audience with several other senior council members, presenting Cade with a formal request that Elena be quietly relocated away from the capital until the Ashwood alliance negotiations concluded successfully. Cade refused the request outright, his anger at the council's continued interference finally boiling over into open confrontation. "I understand your concerns regarding the alliance," he said, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority as Alpha King. "But I will not treat Elena as a political liability to be conveniently discarded whenever it suits diplomatic convenience. If the Ashwood leadership cannot accept my personal choices as separate from official negotiations, then perhaps the foundation of this alliance requires far more careful examination than any of us have previously considered." The council members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unaccustomed to such direct pushback from their king, though none dared challenge him further in that moment. Yet even as Cade stood firmly in Elena's defense, he recognized privately that the political tension surrounding their relationship would not simply dissolve through sheer force of will alone. Something more decisive would eventually be required, a clear and public resolution that would settle, once and for all, both the question of the Ashwood alliance and the question of where Elena truly stood within his life and his kingdom. That resolution, though neither of them yet fully realized it, was approaching far more swiftly than either could have anticipated. The resolution arrived in the form of an urgent summons from Ashwood itself. Word reached the capital that the pack elders, growing increasingly anxious over the uncertain state of the alliance and the persistent rumors surrounding the Alpha King's relationship with Elena, had requested a formal meeting to address the matter directly, insisting that Cade travel to Ashwood personally to resolve the growing tension once and for all. Cade accepted the summons without hesitation, recognizing the opportunity it presented not merely to settle the political concerns weighing on the alliance, but to finally address, publicly and unequivocally, the truth of his feelings for Elena and the injustice she had suffered at Damien's hands. He informed Elena of his decision that same evening, watching carefully for her reaction. "I want you to come with me," he said, "not simply as my companion hidden away from public view, but openly, as the woman I intend to stand beside. I know this will not be easy, returning to the place where you suffered such public humiliation. But I believe it is time, Elena, for both of us to face this directly, rather than allowing rumor and uncertainty to continue dictating the terms of our future." Elena felt a complicated tangle of emotions at his words, fear and apprehension mingling with a growing sense of determination she had not expected to feel so strongly. The thought of returning to Ashwood, of facing Damien and Lauren, and the entire pack that had witnessed her devastating rejection, filled her with genuine unease. Yet beneath that unease, she recognized something else stirring within her, a fierce, unwavering refusal to allow that painful memory to continue controlling her choices indefinitely. "I will come with you," she said finally. "I am tired of running from what happened there. If I am ever going to fully move forward, I think I need to face it directly, rather than continuing to avoid it." They arrived in Ashwood territory 3 days later, accompanied by a formal escort befitting the Alpha King's official visit, a stark contrast to the quiet, unassuming arrival Elena had witnessed weeks earlier, when Cade first appeared incognito at her failed wedding. Word of their arrival spread rapidly throughout the pack, curious and speculative crowds gathering along the main roads to witness the spectacle firsthand. The formal meeting with the pack elders took place in the same grand hall where Elena's wedding had unraveled weeks earlier, the symbolism of the location not lost on either her or Cade as they entered together, side by side, before the assembled council and a gathered crowd that included, much to Elena's carefully controlled discomfort, both Damien and Lauren Blake seated prominently near the front. Cade addressed the pack elders directly, his voice carrying the full authority of his position, as he outlined the terms of the alliance clearly and firmly, making unmistakably plain that his personal relationship with Elena Voss was not a matter open for further negotiation or council interference. "I have observed this pack's leadership carefully over these past several weeks," he said, "and I have found much to respect in your resilience and community. But I will not allow continued gossip and political maneuvering regarding my personal life to undermine an alliance that should be built on mutual respect and genuine partnership, not on outdated expectations regarding who I choose to stand beside." The hall fell silent at his words, the weight of his authority settling clearly over the assembled crowd. Garrett, the pack elder who had presided over Elena's original wedding ceremony, rose slowly to address the Alpha King directly. "Your Majesty, we mean no disrespect toward Miss Voss. Our concerns were born purely of political caution, not personal judgment." "Then let us address the source of that caution directly," Cade said, turning his attention deliberately toward Damien, who shifted uncomfortably beneath the sudden weight of the Alpha King's focused gaze. "I understand that the circumstances surrounding Elena's departure from this pack involved a public humiliation orchestrated by one of your own pack members, a betrayal carried out not through honest communication, but through calculated deception, maintained until the very moment it could cause maximum public embarrassment." Damien rose slowly from his seat, his expression caught between defiance and growing unease, as every eye in the hall turned toward him. "Your Majesty, my personal affairs are not matters for royal intervention." "They become matters for royal intervention," Cade said, his voice hardening, "when the fallout from your cowardice threatens to complicate a formal alliance between our territories, and when the woman you humiliated so publicly happens to be someone I care for deeply. I have watched Elena rebuild her strength and her dignity over these past weeks, despite the devastating cruelty you showed her. I find myself with very little patience remaining for pack leadership that continues to treat her presence as a political inconvenience, while conveniently overlooking your own role in creating this entire situation." Damien's face flushed with embarrassment, as murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd, many eyes now turning toward him, with open judgment, rather than the sympathy he had enjoyed in the immediate aftermath of the failed wedding. Lauren, seated beside him, shifted uncomfortably, her own expression growing increasingly troubled as the full weight of Damien's earlier actions was laid bare once again before the entire pack. "Given your demonstrated lack of judgment and integrity," Cade continued, addressing Garrett and the assembled elders directly, "I find myself questioning whether your pack's current leadership structure adequately reflects the values necessary for a lasting alliance. I understand that Damien was next in line for significant leadership responsibility within Ashwood. I would strongly encourage this council to reconsider that succession, given the character he has so clearly demonstrated." The hall erupted into hushed, urgent whispers, the weight of the Alpha King's implicit demand settling heavily over the gathered pack members. Garrett, recognizing the political necessity of appeasing the Alpha King given the significance of the pending alliance, exchanged brief, uneasy glances with his fellow elders before responding carefully. "Your Majesty's concerns will be given serious consideration," Garrett said. "We value this alliance greatly, and have no wish to see it jeopardized over matters of internal pack leadership." Damien, humiliated in front of the entire gathering and recognizing the precarious position his own actions had created, sank back into his seat, the weight of consequence finally catching up to him in a manner he had clearly never anticipated when he chose to prioritize his own desires over Elena's dignity weeks earlier. Throughout the entire exchange, Elena had remained standing quietly beside Cade, watching the confrontation unfold, with a strange, cathartic sense of vindication, mixed with lingering discomfort at being the center of such public attention once again. When the formal proceedings finally concluded and the crowd began slowly dispersing, she found herself approached briefly by Lauren, who lingered nearby with an expression of genuine, uncomfortable remorse. "I am sorry," Lauren said quietly, her voice barely audible above the departing murmurs of the crowd. "I did not fully understand, when everything happened, the depth of what Damien had truly done to you. I believe I owe you a far more genuine apology than I have offered until now." Elena studied the other woman for a long moment, surprised by the sincerity in her expression. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally. "I hope, whatever you decide moving forward, that you build your future on honesty, rather than the kind of secrecy that nearly destroyed mine." Lauren nodded slowly, tears glistening faintly in her eyes as she turned and walked away, leaving Elena and Cade standing together in the emptying hall, the weight of the confrontation finally beginning to settle into something that felt, for the first time in weeks, remarkably close to genuine closure. "Are you all right?" Cade asked quietly, taking her hand gently in his own. "I think so," Elena said, surprised by the truth of her own answer. "For the first time since that terrible day, I feel like I have finally reclaimed something Damien took from me. Not simply my dignity, though that matters greatly. Something deeper. A sense that I am no longer defined by what happened here, but by everything I have chosen for myself since." Cade smiled softly, lifting her hand to press a gentle kiss against her knuckles. "Then perhaps," he said, "it is time we discussed what comes next for both of us, together." The weeks following their return to the capital brought a transformation neither Elena nor Cade had fully anticipated. News of the Alpha King's public defense of Elena at Ashwood spread rapidly throughout the Northern Territories, and rather than damaging his reputation, as some council members had feared, the story instead cast him in a light that resonated deeply with people across every pack and territory. He was seen not as a ruler distracted from his duties, but as a leader with genuine integrity, willing to stand firmly against injustice even when it proved politically inconvenient. The council's earlier resistance softened considerably in the face of this shifting public sentiment, Roderick and the other senior advisors gradually warming toward Elena as they recognized both her genuine character and the undeniable strength of the bond she shared with their king. What had once been careful exclusion slowly transformed into cautious acceptance, and eventually, as weeks passed and Elena's steady presence at the palace continued proving itself far from the political liability they had originally feared, that acceptance grew into something approaching genuine respect. Elena, for her part, found herself settling into her new life at the capital, with a confidence she had not expected to feel so completely. She began taking an active interest in the kingdom's affairs, offering thoughtful perspective during discussions where her insight as someone who had experienced pack politics firsthand, from outside the halls of power, proved genuinely valuable. Cade found himself relying increasingly on her counsel, not merely as his partner, but as someone whose judgment he had come to trust deeply. Their relationship deepened steadily during this period, free now from the shadows of concealed identity and political uncertainty that had complicated their earlier connection. Elena felt, for the first time since her devastating betrayal at the altar, a genuine sense of security in her own heart, built not on the assumption of fate's predetermined intention, but on the accumulated weight of countless honest conversations, shared struggles, and consistent, demonstrated care. It was on a quiet evening several months after their return from Ashwood, as they walked together through the palace's expansive eastern gardens beneath a sky painted in brilliant shades of orange and pink, that Cade finally gave voice to the question that had been steadily building within him since the earliest days of their journey together. "Elena," he said, stopping beneath a large flowering tree, its branches heavy with pale blossoms that drifted gently in the evening breeze. "I have spent my entire life believing myself unlikely to ever find a genuine mate bond, resigned to a future built purely on political necessity and careful duty. Meeting you changed that belief entirely, not simply because of what the old stories suggest about fate, but because of who you have proven yourself to be, through every difficult circumstance we have faced together." Elena felt her heart begin to race, sensing the significance of the moment building around them. "Cade," she said softly, "what are you asking?" "I am asking you to become my wife," Cade said, his voice steady, despite the vulnerability evident in his expression. "Not because fate demands it, though I do believe now, with complete certainty, that our bond is genuine. I am asking because I choose you, Elena Voss, freely and completely, above every political consideration, above every expectation placed upon me by my position. I want to build a life alongside you, one founded on the honesty and trust we have worked so hard to establish between us." Tears gathered in Elena's eyes, though this time they carried none of the devastating grief that had marked her tears weeks earlier at her failed wedding. These tears carried only overwhelming joy, a profound sense of having finally found something real after enduring such painful betrayal. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, Cade, I choose you as well, completely and freely." Their wedding, when it finally took place several months later, bore little resemblance to the disaster that had unfolded in Ashwood's Grand Hall. It was held instead in the capital's magnificent royal chapel, attended by dignitaries from across every northern territory, including, at Elena's own gracious insistence, her mother Marguerite, who wept openly with joy throughout the entire ceremony, and even a small delegation from Ashwood itself, sent to formally represent the now firmly secured alliance between their territories. Elena stood at the altar once more, dressed in a gown even more magnificent than the one she had worn during her first, devastating attempt at marriage, yet this time, as she waited for her intended to step forward, she felt none of the anxious uncertainty that had plagued her weeks earlier. When Cade appeared at the end of the aisle, his expression radiant with genuine joy rather than concealed guilt, Elena felt the last remaining shadows of her earlier heartbreak finally, completely dissolve. The ceremony proceeded exactly as it should, both of them speaking their binding vows clearly and confidently before the assembled crowd, their voices carrying not hesitation or doubt, but complete, unwavering certainty. When the pack elder presiding over the ceremony finally declared them bound as true mates before all those gathered, the hall erupted into genuine celebration, applause and joyful cries filling the grand chapel in stark, beautiful contrast to the shocked silence that had once marked Elena's first attempt at this same sacred commitment. Following the ceremony, Elena was formally crowned as Luna Queen of the Northern Territories, a title carrying both immense honor and significant responsibility. As the crown was carefully placed upon her head, she found her gaze drifting briefly toward the small Ashwood delegation seated among the crowd, and among them, though he had not been formally invited, she caught a brief glimpse of Damien, standing quietly near the back of the gathered assembly, his expression unreadable as he watched the ceremony unfold. Their eyes met for only a moment before Elena deliberately turned her attention back toward Cade, refusing to allow even a fleeting glimpse of her past to diminish the joy of this transformative moment. Whatever regret Damien carried now for the choices he had made, whatever consequences continued unfolding in his own life, following his public disgrace at Ashwood. None of it mattered any longer to the woman standing beside her true partner, crowned not through desperation or fear, but through genuine, hard-won love. In the months and years that followed, Elena grew into her role as Luna Queen with remarkable grace, becoming known throughout the Northern Territories not merely as the Alpha King's chosen mate, but as a respected leader in her own right, admired for her wisdom, her compassion, and her unwavering commitment to justice for those who, like herself, had once been dismissed or humiliated by those who should have protected them instead. She often reflected, during quiet moments in the palace gardens where her journey with Cade had truly begun to flourish, on the strange, winding path that had carried her from the devastating humiliation of an abandoned wedding to the extraordinary life she now led. She had once believed that her worth was tied entirely to Damien's acceptance of her, that his rejection at the altar had somehow diminished something essential within her. She understood now, with the clarity that only genuine healing could provide, that her lowest moment had never truly been a measure of her worth at all. It had simply been the painful, necessary breaking open of a path that led her, eventually, toward a love built on honesty rather than obligation, toward a partnership that celebrated her strength rather than merely expecting her compliance, and toward a life far greater than anything she could have imagined standing at that first, ill-fated altar. Elena Voss, once spurned publicly by the very mate fate had chosen for her, had risen instead to become a queen in her own right, not through the intervention of fate alone, but through her own unwavering resilience, and through the courage of a king who had chosen, despite every obstacle standing in their way, to stand faithfully and honestly beside her until the very end.